So let me get started. The brain is complex, but in one way it's kind of simple. It divides the world along a single axis into things that are near and things that are far away. Now, the things that are near we can control immediately, your watch, your phone. But if we want to control something that's far away, we have to plan. And whether it's reaching for the salt or flying to the moon, to the brain, that is exactly the same job. No difference. Reaching here, going there, it's the same thing. Now, why would the brain divide the world into these kinds of two spheres? Well, it has to do with nothing less than the purpose of life. Now, you and I can argue all day long about what the purpose of life really is. But when it comes to science, the answer is absolutely settled, no question. The purpose of life is to keep living. We need shelter, we need food, we have to propagate the species, or as I like to put it, the mortgage gets paid, dinner gets made, and we all get, well, anyway. Think about it. None of those three things can be found close by. They're not in this space. They're all on the other side of that axis. Now, the brain has a system that makes us want those things, because we got to want them to survive. It has a system to make us want those things. It has a system that makes us, gives us the ability to find them, and that's called the dopamine system. And here's how it works in very, very simple terms. When something new and potentially useful comes along, we feel a little buzz, a little euphoria, the dopamine buzz. And you know this feeling. That little ding that you hear off your phone, it might be something good. You know that feeling. If you hear pots and pans rattling in the kitchen around dinner time, you know, might be something good. You're in a bar, you see somebody attractive across the room, that might be the one. The world is filled with possibilities, and you feel that little dopamine urge. Now, if you're a caveman, that urge to go get the next new thing is pretty good, because it keeps you alive. But if you have an apartment or a home, and if you know how to go to the grocery store, and if you have a spouse, or if you have the Tinder app, or both, let that one sink in. If you have all that stuff you need to survive, you don't need that dopamine urge so much here in 2018. But here's the thing, your brain doesn't know it's 2018. And that dopamine drive for more has to go somewhere. It hasn't gone away. And it turns out that it influences how we conduct business, culture, love. It affects immigration. It affects ambition. It even affects politics. So let's talk dopamine. Much of the early research that was done on dopamine was done by addiction researchers. That's because the brain the brain chemical dopamine is the chemical of desire and motivation, which is what addicts feel. They want the thing they're addicted to. So, have a look at this little sciencey thing here. So in this study, scientists injected volunteers with cocaine and then measured the activity of a structure in their brain called the striatum. It's a part of the brain that's rich in dopamine activity. Now the red and yellow represents high levels of activity. The blue and green represent low levels of activity. Now what you see is that cocaine is a powerful stimulator of dopamine. A few minutes, 4 minutes in fact, after the drug is injected, the levels of dopamine spike up and go way up in fact, and as the body clears the drug, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, those levels of dopamine come down. Now the scientists were not only interested in brain activity, they also wanted to know what their research volunteers were feeling. So at each point in time, they asked these people for their level of euphoria, and that's the gray bar to the left, to the right there. And what you can see is a tight correlation between dopamine activity and euphoria. The higher the dopamine, the better they felt in the moment. You with me so far? And that's obvious, right? I mean, that just makes perfect sense. You inject with cocaine, they're like, whoa, party on. They're ready to go. Not that anyone in this room would know, but there you go. I'm just saying it. We don't want to make a joke about that, right? All right, here we go. Now, they decided that dopamine was a kind of reward, and that reward was a little burst of pleasure. Hence the term you may have heard that dopamine is the molecule, not of more, but of pleasure. Dopamine is a molecule of pleasure. And you can see why. Dopamine rewards us when we do things that make our evolutionary success a little bit more secure. When we get food, when we find a potential partner, when we win, all those things make the future a little more secure, so the brain gives us pleasure as a reward to keep us going. And that makes perfect sense, except for one thing. It's absolutely wrong. Oh, it's close. It's close to being right. But the correct answer is a lot more subtle and a whole lot more powerful. Think about it. There's almost no likelihood in the world that the brain evolved to encourage you to go find some cocaine. That's just stupid. There's no way that's what the brain evolved to do. It's more likely that it evolved to respond to something that's already in nature and something that can actually help you, not wreck your life. Food, for instance. So that's what the researchers did. They redesigned the experiment. They got rid of the cocaine and they replaced cocaine with food. Now look at what happens. This graph covers just a few seconds, and each dot represents an individual dopamine cell going active. The bars across the top show the total number of cells active. You can see there's more active cells right here. You see the little burst up at the top there? More active cells right there. Now, the vertical line represents a pellet of food, right there, being dropped into the cage with the rats. And a moment later, you get a spike in dopamine fire. So far, so good. It is the pleasure molecule, it seems. You hit the food, the dopamine spikes, there you go. But after time, it changes. Day after day, we drop food into the rat's cage. Day after day, we see the dopamine spike. Except the dopamine spike goes down until, after several days of training, there's no dopamine spike at all. Note what we're looking at here. First time the food hits, bang, dopamine hits. Second time food hits, little bit of dopamine spike. Third, fourth, fifth, dopamine comes down, down, down every time the food arrives until it's just like nothing happened. The dopamine doesn't spike at all. And if we looked at this graph for cocaine, it'd be the same thing. It's pretty clear from that. Dopamine, they're still enjoying the food, they're still enjoying the drugs for that matter, but dopamine is not reacting to pleasure. It's not related to pleasure. It's not triggered by pleasure. It's not the molecule of pleasure, as you may have heard. So what's going on? Maybe you're already there. Once upon a time, the food was new. It was a surprise. Once upon a time, the cocaine was new. It was a surprise. And after it kept coming, what? No longer a surprise. No longer a surprise. As they say, the thrill was gone. So what else was gone? Dopamine. Dopamine, you see, is the molecule of novelty. Dopamine is the molecule of new. Dopamine is the molecule of surprise. Now, if we're going to be scientists, we can't go around just saying simple things like molecule of surprise. We need some fancy words. That's what we need. So I just happen to have a fancy term for you about this surprise effect. Reward prediction error. The scientific term for what's happening to trigger dopamine is reward prediction error. As we go through life, we're constantly making predictions about the future. You open up your wallet expecting to see $40 and there's $60 in there. You just made an error with your reward prediction. You get a little buzz from dopamine. Hey, $60. You're walking down the street, you find a 10. Oh, surprise. You get a little dopamine buzz. Big thing or small thing, it doesn't matter. Underpredict the good outcome. You're not expecting to find a $5 on the ground, but you do. That's great. You find 100, boom, that's even bigger. The more your prediction is off, the stronger the dopamine buzz. Here's another example just from experience. You're walking down the street to work, the same way you go every day. Nothing new to surprise you there until one day there's a new bakery that opens up. Bang, you get the dopamine hit because life just got a little more interesting, a little more surprising. You go in, you order coffee, you get yourself a roll, it's good stuff, and this becomes your new go-to spot every day on the way to work. Man, it's exciting. You go in there, oh man, you go in there the next day, it's exciting. And 2 weeks later, what happens? You know what? Exactly. 2 weeks later, you're sitting in this place you were crazy about, wishing there was a new place to go. The food didn't change, coffee didn't change, roll didn't change, but the dopamine spike from something new and good, the thrill is gone. It wasn't just the coffee that attracted you to this place. It was the fact that it was new, unexpected, and completely better than you thought. The bigger the difference between what you expect and what you get, the bigger burst of dopamine. That is, the more intense the good feeling. How intense? Well, it's pretty simple. Dopamine release equals what you got minus what you expected, the actual reward minus the anticipated reward. You didn't expect much from the bakery, so it only had to be a little better for you to get that great feeling about it. House looks like a dump on the outside, but it's a palace inside. You get the dopamine buzz. You've been married for 30 years. Here's somebody who just looks at you sideways. They don't have to be a model, but oh, well, that's a good feeling because suddenly somebody's paying attention to me, and I did not expect that in my daily life. We are led around by these chemicals in many, many ways. It's not that it's a failure of character. It's not that it's a failure of self-discipline. It's that our first instinct is to be attracted to something new, and the brain has a system inside it that gives you a reward for reacting to something new. Not even something all that good, just something a little better than what you have. That's all. It's that simple. Reward prediction error is a happy surprise, a little exceeding of expectations. If you're expecting a raise of $100 a month and you get $250, there's that dopamine buzz. Of course, then the fade begins. Once the new wears off, the raise of an extra $150 becomes, well, this is just how much I make, the new normal. And you're wondering when you're going to get that next raise. Ted. This is how the molecule of surprise and novelty leads us to the title of the book. How it becomes the molecule of more. Do you see? Because it drives you to find the next new thing. It is the engine of more, of desire. And good for us. Good for us, because that means dopamine is the engine of progress, of bettering yourself, of personal improvement, of societal evolution, of scientific progress, of exploring new boundaries, because we're driven chemically to want more. But there's a downside. If dopamine makes us want more all the time, and makes us eventually dissatisfied, or leaves us, to be specific, leaves us dissatisfied with the things that we have, well, it also means it's the engine of perpetual dissatisfaction and depression. As soon as what we hope for becomes what we have, dopamine disappears. The intensity of the positive and negative dopamine experiences vary from person to person. On one end of the spectrum, we have people with a lot of dopamine. They're highly dopaminergic people. Those who are most motivated by the new, motivated by the novel, motivated by the unknown. They like to explore what's possible, and they're quickly bored with what they already have. These people want change, or to quote the title of my book, they want more. On the other end of the spectrum, we have low dopamine people, those for whom all the other brain chemicals are more influential. The ones that aren't concerned with surprise and more and acquisition, but are concerned with exploring the feelings of the here and now. In fact, that's what we call them in the book, the here and now chemicals, the one that allow us to appreciate the taste or the smell of something, or feel emotions about the people we're around. It's the difference between anticipating the early part of romantic love versus the companionate part of being with someone over the course of a lifetime, not looking forward to the next thing so much as simply appreciating the fact that they're next to you for the rest of your life. These people who have lower dopamine are motivated by preserving the things that they already have. They're generally dubious of change, or at least they're not in constant pursuit of it. They're influenced by real value more than potential value, and the way things feel emotionally and through the five senses. These things weigh heavily on their decision making. In other words, when we consider how people make up their minds about things, it's not just how were they raised, or what are the facts that we've presented them, or what's the most reasonable decision to make in this election or this personal matter. It is how they're oriented. Are they more anticipatory people or appreciative people. And we tend to fall on one side of the axis or the other. High dopamine, anticipating what might be. Low dopamine, appreciating what we already have. Now, as my co-author and I wrote in an op-ed just a couple of weeks ago back in USA Today, we're glad to have that in USA Today, people believe their decisions are primarily acts of reason, logic, and will. More sophisticated observers understand that emotion plays an even stronger role in decision making, but the truly informed observer understands that there's a neurochemical foundation that does more than just add another factor. Dopamine determines our leanings at a foundational level across every human endeavor. Each individual tends to feel the urge for more, or they feel the tendency to enjoy what they already have, anticipation versus appreciation. And this gives us some insight into politics. Here's a couple of facts just right off the lab. Self-described conservatives say that they want to hold on to the things that they have. Self-described progressives want action, they want change, and they want it now. Now, understand, I'm not casting aspersions on anybody. I'm simply saying that in the main, that's a common thing the two different sides say. So when you hear me say that, you won't be surprised to learn that, again, in the main, liberals tend to have more dopamine, higher dopamine levels than people on the right. So what are the consequences of that? Well, running for office and running the government require planning, calculation, creativity. And these are just the things that give a neurochemical reward to high dopamine people, people on the left. Now, I've heard it said that reality has a liberal bias, and I'm not even going to touch that. But I am going to say that government absolutely has a liberal bias because it exists to do new things. Government takes action. If progressivism is the hand, government is the glove, not by nature of its policies, but by nature of its nature. In other words, the fact that we have government at all that does things tends to favor the people who are on the left already. It gives them an advantage that people on the right don't have because they're more oriented toward actually progressing with the government. So how do we even have conservative politicians at all? Well, we do, obviously. They're just not nearly as effective as some of us might like them to be. Dopamine rewards action, and government action isn't usually the path to conservative ends. Conservatism favors market forces, not complex planning from the top down. And there's more. Wait and see can be a reasonable policy, but what do activist voters complain about the most? Do-nothing politicians. That's not to say there aren't low dopamine liberals and high dopamine conservatives, and we're not slaves. I mean, except for addiction, we can say no to dopamine, and there are other factors in play. But in the main, dopamine plays a significant role in orienting us toward one political path on the left or one on the right. Ambitious people tend to prefer action over inaction, power over patience, and these are the people who are running the government. They tend to be high dopamine, they tend to be on the left naturally. And that's why government gets bigger, budgets get bigger, government grows. There's a neurochemical component to the growth of big government. So to begin to wrap all this up, does dopamine really tell us that our destiny is to be unsatisfied forever? Well, for some people, absolutely, but not for everyone. And it doesn't have to be that way for anyone. If we want to get satisfaction from the things that we have to shift down. We have to come out of our dopamine circuits into the here and now. It just feels different to live in the here and now. It's more of a touchy-feely experience. It's not always comfortable for people who love the dopamine rush. But dopamine cannot give you satisfaction any more than a hammer can turn a screw. Dopamine can only say, give me more. And that give me more attitude can get even darker. On July 20th, 1969, Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. Took a whole lot of dopamine to figure that problem out. So much, in fact, that it crowded out nearly everything else in his life. When he returned to Earth, a reporter asked him this. This isn't a summary, this is a quote. What were your emotions as you walked on the surface of the moon? Does anybody happen to know what Buzz Aldrin said? Fighter pilots don't have emotions. That's what he said. On another occasion, here's what he said. Walking on the moon was just something we did. Now we should go do something else. No here and now in this man. It's all dopamine, all more, all pursuit, no satisfaction. In the history of the world, 12 people have walked on the moon. And his reaction was, yep, did that. What's next? No here and now enjoyment, just high dopamine pursuit. He had walked on the moon. Now he's looking for something to top it. That means you got a problem. Here's what happened to Buzz Aldrin, conqueror of worlds beyond. 2 divorces, alcoholism, finally commitment to a psychiatric unit. Did you know that? That's what happened to this great conqueror. He ran out of worlds to conquer. I'm happy to tell you that he did get better, and he did a lot more amazing things after he got his life straightened out. But for a long time, the chemical that enabled him to go to the moon took him all the way back to hell. Because all dopamine wants for you is a little bit more than you already have. Just a little bit more. And if you can't get that, heaven help you. So how do you deal with this in your own world? Well, you have to know that dopamine urge is a race. And it's a race you can't win because there's no prize at the end. When you've achieved some success, stop. Spend some time dwelling on it. Look at it, feel it, live in it, appreciate it, share it, and make the choice to do that because your brain, if you're ambitious at all, is going to say, let's go get the next thing. And you wake up one morning, your kids are grown because you've been running them to the next activity, running them to the next meeting, running them to school the next day. We're here. Take some pleasure in it. Live in the here and now. And if you're ambitious, you're going to have to force yourself to do that. Dopamine is our most powerful biological engine, but it hides itself so well that most of the world doesn't know what it really does. But now you do. So when you pursue a goal driven by the molecule of more, know that this pursuit exists for a reason. So we can reach the goal and then stop and take pleasure in it, to have a better here and now. And that's the more that matters. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions.